everybody, welcome to this week's masterclass. Today we're going to be doing an acrylic image based on the Botanical Gardens of Wales, which is in Carmarthenshire. We're very lucky to have it here, and it's a place that I've had exhibitions at and I've used for inspiration. It's open 7 days a week. Check it out on their website. They've got lots of things going on, and it's a beautiful spot, a beautiful part of the world to visit. So go and have a look if you're not already members. I know a lot of you are members already. Just go and have a look. I've downloaded a few images off their website, and I just want to show you a couple of them. There's this one, which is sort of reasonably current. It's got summer flower displays there, and the Botanic Gardens is famous for it's the biggest single span greenhouse, or I think they call it greenhouse. It houses lots and lots of very exotic plants, and it's quite spectacular. So we're going to do a picture of that today. There's this one, which is more sort of springtime, but it's got people in it, which is quite nice. And then there's this one, which is from a slightly different angle from one of the lakes around the back of the big house. So, you know, have a look on their website for pictures. You may already have some pictures of your own. So what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate a few bits from each of these pictures into our final composition, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, we're coming towards the end of, I think we'll be on the last week of September this week. So I hope you've enjoyed the first month of your membership, and if you want to carry on, let me know. We've still got no future idea of what's going to happen with the Community Education Centre. They're still closed effectively, well, closed to art classes. So this is how we'll have to continue for a while, but I know that you're enjoying it. I've had some really good feedback. I've had some good tips on how to be a more effective communicator and to get across things a little bit more efficiently. So thanks for those tips. And please pass on this information to anybody that you know. It'd be nice to see the membership increasing. Okay, so the next stage you'll see, I'll talk you through how to recompose your picture from these pictures that I've sent you. I hope you've downloaded and printed them off so that you can use them as a reference. Okay, see you in a little bit. Okay, so this week is being completed in acrylic. So what I've got here, just to show you some different boards and things to paint on, is what you call an acrylic board. So this is just simply, I've got a thing, I used it as a sign a while ago, it's simply a piece of cardboard with canvas stretched over it, and you can buy these really cheaply. I use these a lot. The only thing is that you have to then frame them, unlike the canvases, which you can just hang directly on your wall. Okay, so this is an old scrap piece which I'm going to reuse. I think I was given it actually a while back. So don't be frightened to use old bits of canvas, old bits of board, old canvases. You can always paint over them, you know, don't throw them away. I often remove the canvas and then re-stretch a canvas, which there's a tutorial on how to do that on my YouTube site. Okay, so what I've done, like I said, was to take all three images and just reference them. So you can see from this image that I've done the dome, the glass house, and I've taken part of the foliage here, because this was the main picture that I preferred because it has a more dynamic composition, as in it has a lead up to the greenhouse here. So I think we did a tutorial on composition a while back, and that explained that having pathways, or these, if you're familiar with the Botanic Gardens, you'll know about this little stream that runs all the way down the main thoroughfare. It's very lovely, and it runs all year, and you know, kids can play in it and dogs play in it, and it's just a really beautiful part of the Botanic Gardens. But the composition here is more interesting than this one. However, this one, the focus is the flowers. So, you know, it really depends on what you fancy as to what you use. So I decided to use this, incorporate some of the floral detail here in the foreground, because I thought that this bit was a bit empty. You might like it. So if you like it, just leave it as it is. This tree I moved over because it's too, it's covering the glass house too much, so I just shifted it over to the right hand side. And I also quite like that there's a little bit more information about what else is there. So there's the house there, the original house, and also there's a few people in. Whether I put the people in, I don't know, but it does animate the image, so it's up to you. If you rather do autumnal colours, then you've got this to reference. You could also maybe put part of the lake in the foreground, but I like this another feature of the Botanic Gardens, which is this Rock of Ages. So it's again, it runs all the way up the path here, and it's got all rocks from different ages throughout time. So you can actually see how they change and what the structures are like. So that's another really interesting part of the garden. Okay, so you've got everything in there. You've got the house, you've got the glass house, you've got some trees, some floral interest, the rocks of ages, some people, and the stream. Okay, and I've just drawn this out in pencil. I've just used a 2B pencil. I've done a little bit of scratching around with it, but I used the thirds, the rule of thirds again. Okay, so what I've done is I've put my horizon on that top third there. Okay, and my subject is also sitting across both of those crosses. Okay, so that again is a dynamic composition. All right, so the next stage is to add colour. And what I've got is just a medium-sized brush. Let me find one. An acrylic brush. So if you remember the difference between an acrylic brush and a watercolour brush, acrylic brushes tend to be longer, and they also have white hairs, and the hairs are much coarser as opposed to a watercolour brush, which is more like short and brown and soft. Okay, so when you're using acrylic paint, make sure you use the right brushes. You can use watercolour brushes, but you will then no longer be able to use them for watercolour. All right, so I've got 3 colours. I've got them, they're pre-mixed. I mix colours up and I save them if I don't use them all. So I save them in these containers. This is just a little bit of cerulean blue or cobalt blue. That's your lighter blues that you've got in your set of acrylics, mixed with some white. All right. So mix it up until you get a light blue colour. And if you're doing it in watercolour, so if you don't want to do the acrylic this week and you fancy doing this image in watercolour, you use the same colours, but instead of adding white, you add water. So you get your cerulean blue or your cobalt blue and you add water to that to thin it down, and that exposes the white of the paper, which is how you lighten colours in watercolour. So I'm just putting, what you do with acrylic is you work light to, well, you can work dark to light with acrylic, unlike watercolour. But what I'm doing is I'm just going to block in the main areas of this painting. And I'm just going to block them in flat. So the consistency is of thick cream. So not too much water. The more water you put in, the more transparent the paint goes, and it won't cover up your lines. You can go behind the tree because obviously some of the tree will have gaps in it. So go behind the tree and down to that distant hill, which is where Paxton Tower is. Some of you may have walked up there. It's a very beautiful walk up to Paxton Tower. Great views down the Towie Valley. Really great place to paint if you like painting outside for the view. So you can see I'm just blocking this colour in. If you're doing watercolour, you might want to do this wet in wet. So what that means is, so with a watercolour you would be using watercolour paper and watercolour paints, and you would draw your picture out very lightly, as we've talked about before, because you can see your lines through watercolour. And then what you do is you can put water down on the paper surface. So wet the paper surface first, and then you drop the colour in and it spreads, and that gives you a very soft colour. And in the same process you can lift out the clouds just by dabbing with a paper towel, scrunched up paper towel, and just dab out the clouds, whereas we're going to put the clouds on top of this. Okay, so with acrylic you're just blocking in the main colours. So I've got blue for the sky. I'm just going to wash my brush off. Use clean water to wash your brush off, and a rag, which I use old socks or old pants. So a rag just to get rid of the excess water. The main trouble with acrylic is excess water. So again, I've got a yellow here, and this is just a bit of cadmium yellow mixed with a tiny amount of white acrylic. And the reason why I'm using yellow is because I want these greens to really stand out. So anywhere there's green, put the yellow. And we're going to paint over most of this colour, but to keep your greens nice and vibrant, especially if it's and we're just going to pat in a few bits of yellow just in around here like that, into the distant landscape. Everywhere there's green, pop your yellow. And the reason why we do this, is to keep our greens that we put on top really vibrant. People tend to mix greens up. I mean, people struggle with greens anyway, mixing greens that are sort of friendly greens rather than really harsh greens. So they struggle with that to begin with, and then on top of that they just put green, which probably isn't the right mix, straight on without putting any undercoat on. So you end up with these sort of muddy green strong areas of colour, which you then find really difficult to get rid of or to actually look at. You know, a mass of green is a tough colour for the eye to look at. So we're just going to put this lovely vibrant yellow down, block out the green areas, and then hopefully our greens will remain lovely and vibrant. So down here, because this is all path, I decided to just put a little corner in here, mainly because I don't want that path to be too big. So I'm just going to put a little bit of green there. Now, do we have any anywhere else? Underneath, oh yes, here, this comes down, doesn't it? So just carry on. If you get any hairs, just lift them off. There's a little tree there, and a little tree there, and a little tree there. And there's some more green over and around those rocks that are just there as well. All right. So that's just cadmium yellow and, oh, actually, we need to put a little bit up there. And a little touch of white in, not too much. And we just need to put, because the grass goes up the side of the glass house, and it's quite spectacular in the winter, because when it snows, the snow goes up, and obviously it slips off the glass, but it looks amazing, and people often sledge down it, which looks great. great fun. Right, I realised that I've missed the glass house. So I'm just going to clean my brush off again, clean it off in clean water and remove excess water with a rag. Use a rag rather than a paper towel, because unless your paper towels are recyclable, which is fine, but you know, you can just wash the rags and reuse them, whereas with a paper towel you have to throw them away. So if you can make the effort to recycle and reuse as far as possible, especially with art materials, it's much better. Now we're painting the glass house dome blue because it's see-through and it's obviously reflecting the sky, so that's why we're doing it in blue. Don't worry about the green that's there, it's fine. Okay, so the rest of it is it's sort of, I don't know what it's paved with. It's sort of a concrete based paving of some sort. So if it's using local stone, which it probably is, the local stone around here in West Wales has a pinky tone to it. So I've got a pink here mixed up. It's actually, well, you can use pink mixed with white, or you can use purple mixed with white, or you can use a bit of purple and red mixed together and then a bit of white to get this sort of pinky tone. All right. And I'm going to undercoat that in this. So what you want it to do, you want it to be a bit purpley, just to match the stone of the area. So you're getting a geology lesson as well as an art lesson. And if you're lucky, I might talk about my lichen obsession, because on these rocks here are growing wonderful lichens. And if you look at my website, juliannesheridan.co.uk, you'll see that a lot of my recent paintings have been sort of abstract versions of lichen. And I went to work with the lichenologists at the Botanic Gardens a couple of years ago, and they let me into lots of secrets and information about lichens and how they're protecting them and how important they are to our environment. And obviously they showed me round and gave me details, allowed me to use the library there, which was marvellous. And then I had a show there in the Oriel Arth, which is the garden gallery, which is a very nice space. And while I'm here, I'm just going to paint the building this colour as well. And the show was great. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it working with the staff there. Bruce Landridge, Ray Words, Teresa, who were all very helpful. Had a great show there. And round the back of the glass house is a tree, a special lichen transplantation tree. So where there are certain lichens dying off in the east of Wales, they are picking some and moving them and transplanting them onto this tree, because one of the killers of lichen is pollution. So because the air around here is so clean, we have one of the largest, the highest densities of lichens in the world in West Wales, and that's because the air is so clean. So they're sort of trying to give the lichens a chance, the ones that are dying off anyway, by moving them to a different situation and seeing if they survive. And they are surviving, which is great. Okay, so there we have the main body of the painting. So this is what you do with all acrylic paintings. You draw your image out and then you block out the main areas, and then you let that dry, and then you can come in and you can start to work on your detail. All right, so I'll let you get to this stage. I'm going to leave this to dry, and I'm going to go and have a cup of tea because my voice is going already. And again, you know, look at the images. If you fancy doing one of the other images, like I really love this one, but I felt that because it's still sort of late summer here, I didn't really want to get too involved in this autumnal feel. Not yet. Maybe we'll do it later on in the year, or maybe early next year or something like that. But you may really love this. So if you do, then you could just copy this image and just follow the same rules, you know, pale blue. You can probably use green underneath all this area here, but obviously with the water, use a blue again and just block it out. Don't think of detail. Think of it in shape form. Okay. Ooh, I'll just pick that off there. I don't know where that came from. Okay. So just get to this stage and then go and have a cup of tea, and you can move on to the next bit. Okay, so now it's dry, or more or less dry. I've got a plate. I use paper plates a lot. They're recyclable, so you don't need to worry about them going in the bin. And I've put a little bit of white. We're just going to improve the sky, but we're not going to put too much detail in because we want the focus to be on, and I've got a big pot of pale blue there, which is just cerulean or cobalt blue mixed with white. Okay, so I've got three colours. I've got the cerulean mixed with cobalt blue, and I've got white and ultramarine blue, which is your dark blue. Okay, not too much, you don't need too much, it's only a small area to cover. But I'm going to mix, I'm going to take some of this paler blue, and I'm going to look at this picture here, and I'm going to try and see the tones in this picture. So we've not got too much cloud in there. If you want to put clouds in, then you can, but I'm not going to do that. And I can see that on the right hand side is where the light is. So this area is lighter, this area is darker. The shadows are all falling to the left hand side of all the structures. So underneath the bushes there, you can see the shadows are on the left. The shadows are on the left of the people as well. So we'll work to that the light is coming from the right hand side. So I'm just going to lighten up this area here with a little bit of that paler colour. And because we're putting this down, you don't need to worry about the fact that the colour underneath shows through, because it's actually quite useful to have that. So you can leave it quite painterly if you want. Go over the tree a bit, and then what we're going to do is we're going to work in this blue, and we're going to do it over this side. I'm going to use the excess paint that's on my brush. I'm using acrylic brushes. As I said, don't use your watercolour brushes unless you absolutely have to. It won't do them any good. I often use watercolour brushes for detail, however, because it's quite difficult to get fine acrylic brushes at times. So you can see the benefit of having the colour underneath there. It gives you a little bit of ability to have some flashes of the undercoat coming through. So we've got a lighter tone over that side. I'm just going to go and get that blue colour that we used earlier on to undercoat it with, which is a slightly darker tone to the one that I put on the right hand side here. I'm just going to incorporate a bit of that. And you can see I'm just picking up bits of paint here and there. I'm working on it reasonably quickly because I don't want it to dry out on me, but I still want to achieve a blended sky. And the only way you can do that is by keeping it wet, but not adding water. To keep it wet, add more paint, not water. The tendency is to go in with water. I'll say this over and over again with acrylic, and you mustn't do that, because, so you can see I'm just picking up a small amount of the blue and putting it down on top of the wet paint. and that gives you the ability to be able to spend some more time just blending that colour in, making it darker, making it lighter, whatever you have to do. But it must be wet underneath. And like I said, just don't add water. Because this sky is in the distance, I mean, the bit behind the glass house is in the distance. We don't need to put too much colour and detail in the sky, but often you'll find that the sky at the top is a slightly different tone to the sky on the horizon. So if you want, you can put some of that darker blue, that ultramarine blue, along the top, but make sure that you keep blending. I mean, you know, this is if you want a flat sky. If you don't want a flat sky and you want it to be more painterly, then you can leave the brush marks in. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. You must make it to your own taste. I'm sort of providing instructions based on the knowledge that I've got of my students. So I know that most of the time they want, or you want, should I say, because you are now my students, a sort of more blended finish. So I'm instructing you that way because I know it's a preference. But you know, if you wanted to make it more chunky or thicker or whatever, if you make it thicker, make sure that you keep the thicker paint towards the top of the sky, because the top of the sky is the bit that's closest to you. Okay, so there you have a nice blended, simple sky. All right, so as you work more into it, it will dry out. So just be aware of that. And it's quite thin. Okay, so we're going to work down now. And because the grass is sitting over and on top of the sort of more hard areas of this piece, what we'll do is we'll paint these first and then we'll do these afterwards. So we'll paint the paths first. So with the paths, we've got like a sort of purpley brown tone. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre, which I've got here. And this is a Reeves paint. This is quite good quality. And I've got some burnt umber. Okay, and that's from Wilko, so that's cheap. So if I use a little touch of that, and I've got some yellow ochre, I can use the blue and the white that I've already got down there. I might as well use it. And I really need the purple. I'll just get the purple. And this is the sort of purpley pinky mix that we used originally. So we've got white, brown, burnt umber, that's your dark brown, ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. And we're going to use a little bit of the pink as well. All right, and we're going to mix up some tones to go on this path section. Okay, so to get it wet again, I'm just going to mix up a little. I'm going to get a bit of that pink back on my brush, and I'm going to just re-wet this area here. You can't re-wet what's underneath because once acrylic is dry, it's dry. It doesn't move, which is one of the benefits of it. So along that path there, just re-wet that area a little. Okay, and then we're going to come in with a little bit of the yellow ochre. Now the yellow ochre is very strong, so we add some white to it. I'm just going to a little touch of water and some white to it, and we're going to put aspects of that around this area here. So don't worry about the stream, because what we'll do is we'll put that in afterwards once it's dry. We're just going to use this light tone just to lift this area here. Okay, so as it goes backwards, it gets a bit lighter. So we're just going to lighten that up using that yellow ochre and white mix. And with this, keep it reasonably blended in the distance here. So that just means put the paint down and smooth it in. But when you come down further towards the front of this area, you want to leave it a little bit more textural. So leave some lines from your brush in the work. So just keep adding that yellow ochre mixed with the white. Remember, it was a yellow ochre mixed with the white. You can add a little bit of white in as well where those highlights are, just where the sun is catching this rough texture around here. Just lighten it up a touch. White is very strong, so be careful with it. This Wilko white is cheap, so it's not so strong, but you'll find with other brands that the pigment in it is better and therefore stronger. So just be careful with your additions. You have to work to the sort of nature of the paint that you've got, really. And in the same respect, you know, with regard to mixing colours, if you haven't got yellow ochre, then use something else. You might only have a very simple set of colours, so you have to work with what you've got and try and do your best with it, you know. Okay, so now we're just going to put a touch of brown in. So we've lightened it up a touch with the white and the yellow ochre, and we're just going to take a touch of burnt umber and add it into that same pigment. So it's using all the sort of excess yellow ochre, and it's lightening it up, a bit of the pink in there as well. And we're just going to darken, so the edge along by the stream is slightly darker. So I've put the edge down. Can you see how I'm doing that? I've put the edge down and then I'm just blending it horizontally, because this path is horizontal, remember. So into the rest of the paint. Put a touch here. You don't need much, you can see that. You really don't need very much of this darker colour to get a result. And remember that the paint is wet underneath, so keep it wet. If it starts drying out on you, keep it wet. You can do that by adding more paint or a tiny dot of water, but only really a tiny dot. I'm just going to put a darker section just along that edge there, like that. And then on this corner here and down here, just to give a little bit of interest in that section there. And really it's just creating a rough texture on this path area. The path is not the important bit, so you don't need to put too much work into it, just a little bit of highlight and shadow just to give it a little bit of interest. You know, you don't want it to be boring, but in the same way that you don't want it to dominate your picture, you want it to be sitting there in the background but contributing, but not doing too much. So I'm just going to take a little bit more of that pink colour and just pop a bit back in. Now if you don't like the colours that I'm using, change them. You don't have to use, you know, if you see more brown in this path, then put it in. People do see different colours at different times. Everybody's eyes are different, so don't think that you have to, you know, it's your painting after all. Don't think that you have to rigidly stick to the colours that I'm creating here. They might not be your cup of tea. You might want to do them brighter. You know, if you like really vivid, bright paintings, then, you know, go for it. So that's that bit done. Just put a bit of brown. I've just put a little bit too much colour there then. Just put a bit of darker brown back in along there. So as you can see, it's quite rough. I will put this path back in another time. But while you've got these paints on your palette, and you can see we've still got quite a lot there, you can work some colour into your rock structures. So you might want to use a smaller brush for this. So pick up a smaller brush, use some clean water, and again, all you need to do with every structure is create a highlight. So that can be my highlight colour. Now the rocks on this picture are not very descriptive because obviously whoever's camera it was picking up the light of the sky, and as a consequence the detail on the rock has sort of been minimized as a result because of the tone of the light. So be aware of that. I'm mixing a shadow colour here, and I'm just going to put a bit of blue. It's really good idea always to put a touch of blue, that's the ultramarine blue, into that shadow colour. And I've just got I've got an old watercolour brush here, and what you can do is I'll just add a little tiny bit of water, and I just want to do that so I can get the paint flowing. So you go in lumpy, remember, keep it lumpy, it's a rock after all. Don't go for perfect straight lines. And you know, again, if you need to redraw some of these rocks, you can do it at this stage if you're confident with drawing with your brush. If you're not, then hand draw over the pink your descriptive lines back in, so you have something to follow. So we're just blocking in. So I put the shadow in first so I can see the structure. It's actually a bit of a different shape, that rock, than what I've drawn it here, but I'll go with it loosely. If we get noise in a minute, it's because they're cutting the hay on the field out the back of my studio, so I can hear it coming already. So there's that side, and then we've got a rock in the foreground which has this sort of edge on it, coming down there like that. And then we've got a few marks, and then the edge there, and it goes up. So I'm just using the same burnt umber colour to block those rocks in. And then there's a rock sort of lower down on the floor which has some pebbles around it, but we will paint the pebbles in afterwards. The rocks up here, be careful where you put your hands. And like I said, if you're not into freehand drawing these structures, then draw them in with a pencil. Now that rock there is almost in total shadow, and then there's another rock just here like that. And there are a cluster of other little rocks here and there in this area, so we'll just put some random, I think there's another rock here as well, but it's sort of covered by a bit of foliage, so I'll put it in. We may end up painting over it a bit. Okay, so once you've got your shadows in, it's time to do the highlights. So like I said, that yellow ochre colour mixed with a bit of white will give you a highlight colour. Alright, you can always use the brown, the burnt umber, if you haven't got yellow ochre. So I'm doing these rocks at the wrong time here. Ideally, you should paint your grass first, but I just wanted to show you that you could put in the highlight colours while you've still got this palette of colour available to you. So if you've got excess paint, the other option is to cover it with a wax wrap or a lid. There's a jet going over. We get a lot of jets around here. Or a bit of cling film, and just keep it until later. But I just wanted to show you how to block these rocks in. So there's your highlight. Now the bit on the right hand side is a mixture between a highlight and it's a middle tone. So what I'm doing is I'm moving a bit of the dark colour over and I'm mixing it with the light colour to get a middle tone. And we're just going to put that down this side. Slightly, ever so slightly darker than the one that's used as a highlight. Okay, so you can repeat that with the other stones. And then the next phase would be to do the grass section. And actually, because I've got a little bit of this tone left here, I'm just going to put that on the house because it's ideal for the house, for that bit that's in highlight here. So again, if you need a smaller brush, use a smaller brush. Just pop that in. So this is what you need to think about as you're going around. Are the colours relating to anything else in the picture? If so, use them. Okay, I'm going to finish the stones. And I'll do those in, well, no, I won't actually. The next stage will be to do the greens, okay? Okay, so now we're going to deal with the distant greens. So you can either look at this one or this one. Pick out the greens that you like, mix them up. Now, on one of my other tutorials, you'll see there are instructions on how to mix greens. So if you don't have much experience on how to mix greens, then go and look at those tutorials before you start using these greens, okay? And have an experiment with mixing different shades of green. The tutorials are in watercolour, but you use the same theory, but instead of adding water, you add white paint to mix up the greens, okay? But here I've got a blue, a yellow, I've got a very pale yellow, which I've used a bit of green and a bit of white. I've got a dark green, and then I've got a couple of mid-tone greens here. There's one there which is more like a grassy green, and then there's another light tone green. All right, so just mix up a little range of greens that you can use. All right, so on the glass house, the green is quite rich. So what I'm going to do, I don't know whether you can see this, is I'm just taking a bit of the yellow out of this tub of pre-mixed yellow that I've got. This is a cadmium yellow, but it's been mixed with a little bit of white. And I'm going to add some of the sort of middle tone green in, which you'll probably have in a set, or a sap green even, into that yellow, and you can see it immediately brightens up that green. And if you need to add more yellow. if you want it even brighter. So rather than adding white, I'm adding yellow. That will give you a nice rich green. If you add white, it just dulls it down. And I'm using a small round brush. And I'm just going to paint. Now, because this is in the distance, this green, you won't see any detail. So it's basically just a flat shade of green. But you need it to be reasonably well covered so that you can't see the canvas showing through. You always work reasonably thinly in the distance, but in the same way you don't really want to see the canvas showing through. It's a little bit easier in the foreground because you use thicker paint. So you can see the benefit of putting the undercoat of the yellow on now. And the benefit of that is that you don't have any white patches showing through of the canvas. Now as we move over to the right hand side, if you remember, that's where the light comes from. So I'm going to get a bit more yellow on my brush and I'm going to put a bit of yellow in it. I'm just working on the canvas here, mixing the paint on the canvas, and that colour comes all the way down behind the bush, the tree should I say. Can you see that that side is slightly lighter there than there? Okay, so that's all you really need. Now over this side you've got a distant hill which is slightly darker, but I'm just going to use this green just to sort of put rough patches in like that. And then as it comes forward it gets more yellow, so I'm just adding in a little bit more yellow into that section there. Now when we get down here, what we've got are plants, and they're going to come up above. If you look at this, the plants come up above the lawn line, so you don't really need to put any more detail, any more green in this area. Just make sure you've got enough coverage in that section. We're going to work on foliage sort of separately. We're just simply looking at lawned areas here and the distant hills. So in the foreground I'm not going to have this much foliage because it's too dominant, so we're going to have some lawned area. So round where the tree is going to be lawned. Now because this is now closer to you, you want to use your paint a bit thicker. So really get this paint on, and we're going to sort of take it up under the tree and right over to that right hand side. You may run out of paint like I've done. And it comes right over, there's even a dot here. But again, we'll probably put some foliage in there, so you don't need to worry too much, but we do want a bit of that lawn showing through where that background is. In fact, let's have it going all the way up to there. I might need to put a little bit more path in there. Need to mix a little bit more green in around those rocks. And this is why I said you should do this green before you put your rocks in, because it's fiddly to sort of paint around these areas now. Whereas if you put your green down first, you can paint your rocks over the top. So do your rocks after you've done your green. Much better idea. And we're going behind the tree here with this green colour. And we're going to leave it a little bit more sort of textural, because we're coming down to this middle area, middle ground. What we want is a little bit more information, and the information comes from the texture in the paint. So just use your brush in at different angles and just sort of, can you see, I'm just rotating the brush as I'm using it. I'm just putting a few varied marks in there so that it sort of gives the impression that it's a bit more texture that you can see because it's nearer to you. Okay. Here comes the tractor. They cut the hay yesterday, so it's a great day. It's 24 degrees outside today, so right past the window. Okay, so that's the green of that section. We're going to do the foliage here. We're going to put some more foliage in around this area. Now this area here, you need to decide what you're going to put there. And I'm going to do rocks and foliage coming out of the rocks. So we need to put the rocks down first before we do the green. However, I just need to put a little bit of green over here, just so I can undercoat that later with some foliage. Just going to put a dot of green in there, and again, because it's in the foreground, just use some different brush marks. Okay, so with the rocks, I'm going to show you a different technique. All right. Right, okay, a technique for creating rough ground, rocks, stones. You could do all sorts. You could even use it in this sort of middle ground grass area, is to use a sponge. Now I've got a natural sponge here, but you can easily, if you haven't got a sponge, you can use a household sponge, you can use a scrunched up piece of paper, paper towel, you can use a scrunched up piece of cloth. Just find something that will give you sort of lumpy bits, and all I do is I just dip it very, very briefly into a pot of water, just dampen it ever so slightly. Take your palette with your yellow ochre on it and just dip it into the yellow ochre, can you see, like that? And then you're just going to sponge onto this area. Be careful of your edges if you can. Just work up to those edges. And this is another reason again why we didn't finish painting our stones, so that we can put this texture on. If it goes over your edges, you can always just wipe using got a sock somewhere, a piece of cloth, the back. Just take a damp cloth and just wipe off the stuff that goes over the edges. So into here, sorry about the tractor again. Part of living in the countryside. I did a great film a few years back which got shown at Oriel Merthin of the tractors collecting the hay, but they were doing it in the middle of the night, and it was great because they put these lights on their tractors, and you can just see these beams of colour going around in the darkness. It was really interesting. So in with the yellow ochre. And then you can take, again, just dip it slightly in water. Don't use too much water because if it's too wet, it doesn't work. And then into the darker tone. Don't go mad. Just put it in places like this. Just lightly dot around these areas here. You can see it building up nicely. And then, you know, into your white light tone. Don't have too much white on there. Mix it in. You'll see why in a minute. Look, can you see? So because it's lighter over here, I'm just going to put a bit of white over in this area. And it slowly builds into a textural area. And it will blend as well. See if we need any more over here. Just a touch on that corner, I think. A bit in there. So do this before you do your rocks. Okay, we're only going to put the rocks there, I think. Just put a bit more white in there. All right, and then just make sure that you wash your sponge off afterwards. Okay, and the other thing to do is to take a small brush again, and using those brown tones that we've used before, mix up some colours. So we've got burnt umber, yellow ochre and white basically. And you can put some larger rocks in. So not just small rocks, but larger. The suggestion of larger rocks in these areas here, just by, you don't have to be too precise, just, and especially on these corner bits here, and really where you've gone over the edges, you can put in some more rocks like this. Again, don't overdo it. The rocks are only in certain places. Have some coming out from behind areas. In with a bit of white so that you can put some lighter toned rocks in. And remember, we're going to put foliage here, so you don't have to cover everything up. Put some rocks going in front of these. And I'm just using sort of circular motions to create the illusion of rocks. Yeah, okay. Carry on like that until you're happy. Okay, I've just zoomed in on these distant grassy sections here, and we're just going to look at this sort of area here. I'm sorry, but the light is changing a little bit. This area sort of here in the distance, which has got some sort of bush foliage area here. Okay, so I'm just going to put in something very rough because again it's in the distance, we don't want too much detail. So I've just got my mid-tone green, like a sap green or something like that. You mix that using you can use ultramarine and yellow mixed together, and then I'm just going to go in and paint the basics of the foliage that are happening in the distance. So we've got some trees. I'm just going to pop those in very roughly. Again, we don't want too much detail here because it's in the distance, so we just want rough shapes. And also, you know, you can vary your brush marks and vary the tones of greens that you're putting in. So you can pick up a bit of yellow and just add it in and just build up a semi-detailed area around those, around the main house. Dip into your other greens if you've got them to hand, just to sort of give you a variety of colour in those sections. And this bit up here is just literally a load of foliage. You'll know if you go to the gardens that they have different areas representing different countries and all sorts of things. So, you know, there's a variety of shrubs, herbs, all sorts of things going on up there. And then as you come over, you're into the dome area, which changes obviously. So it goes into the entrance here. If you want to put in more colour in these areas, then please do. For example, if you see lilac or lavender or any kind of foliage that you're enjoying in those pictures, then add some different tones in there. There's no reason why you couldn't pick up a bit of that pink tone that we used earlier on and just lighten up patches like this. Do you know what I mean? But you mustn't go into too much detail here, because this is, like I said, this is in the far distance, so we don't want too much going on up there. All right. When we come further round to I don't know quite how that works, but there's pretty much foliage all the way along here, all along this area here, and in front of the main door. From this angle it looks like it's in front, but obviously when you go up to it, it's not. Soften it around the edges of the path. Carry on with different shades, add bits of yellow in occasionally until you're happy with it. You can even use a stippling brush or your sponge to create these areas. I'm just going to go carefully around the edge of my stone before I put in any texture, like that. I'm going to keep that bit reasonably simple because I want the stone to stand out. So I'm just picking up a bit of yellow here, just to separate, whoops, went into the stone there, but it doesn't matter. I want to use the yellow to separate the lower area here from the area that's behind it. So if I introduce some yellow there, and even some of that pinky tone, then it will separate from the areas that we've got there. You don't need to go much further than that with that section. You can always go back and add more if you need to later on. Okay, so with the lawn we have some highlights. So I'm using a little bit of yellow and I'm going to just put this in where the top of the lawn is there, because the light is catching the top of the lawn all the way along there, all the way behind the tree. So I'm using the yellow as a highlight tone, and it comes all the way along there also. And then I'm just going to smooth it in to the rest of my green that's down below. And I'm going to repeat that exercise with a couple more flashes, one that comes behind my rock here. Be careful with your edges. If this yellow's too bright for you, just pick up bits of it and move it around like that. Smooth it into the other greens. But make sure that any highlights are continued beyond. So like we did here, we're going to put the yellow along that top edge. And with the lawned area, you don't really need to do much more than this. Then put a few highlights in, extend them up, bring them down a touch, like that. Probably put a bit too much there, but smooth it in. Ooh, I've got a bit of a lump. You probably can't see that actually. Let me move this over a bit. So I'm over here now. Sorry about that. I've forgotten that I was zoomed in. So I've just put the yellow there. I'm just continuing it so it does go behind the tree, because if you don't do that, it'll end up looking like you've painted around your tree. Into that highlight area, like that. Now we've got a shadow, so we're going to take a bit of dark green and a bit of blue and just put a shadow in under this tree. So like this. It's extended beyond, and that the reason being is that the upper canopy is quite strong. So again, just lightly, and then if you've got any other shadows, put those in as well. Okay, the other thing to mention is to put some darker colour just in that distant hill. Can you see the distant hill? Let me move it over again, zoom in here. Oops. So just up here, and it's where you can see on here, I've got this wet slightly, just here where you can see the distant hill behind the tree. So I'm just going to put in a couple of little marks, not much, quite thin, just to sort of give that distant hill a little accent. It disappears behind there, so don't put any more in. Take a bit of lighter tone, whatever you've got. You can always just add a bit of white into it and just do the same thing. Just put a few little marks like that, and that'll just give you the impression that there's a hill back there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to add in some texture, foliage, flowers, all that sort of thing into this lower area here. And for that I'm going to use you can either use a detail brush, or you can use, if you've got one, a rigger brush, or you can use a fan brush. So I've got a rigger brush and a fan brush here. These are both this is a rigger, it's just long and thin, and this is a fan. And you can do multiple things with these. So using the fan, this is a technique again. If you haven't got a fan brush, what you can do is use an old tired, let's see if I've got one. Yeah. So something like that, an old screwed up brush, and just pull the hairs apart like this so that they separate a little, and you can use that instead of a fan brush. With the fan brush, make sure you don't use too much water with it, because it will clog up. If you dip it in water, you can see that the hairs start to join up together. And what you want to do is try and keep these hairs as separate as possible by not adding too much water to your mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip it into, let's see now. I've got some very pale green here, and all I've done is I've mixed, you can see that colour. I've mixed a bit of green with a lot of white. Okay, make sure that your brush, let me just move this off here. Make sure that your brush is very separate, and the way you do that is by just sort of pressing it against can you see, a surface like that, so that the hairs separate again. And then what you can do is, looking carefully at the foliage on your picture, you can put some grasses in this area here. So I need a bit more paint on my brush. Pick up the paint on the edges of the brush head, and then you can go in and you can start to add. And can you see how this brush works? What that does is it gives you multiple marks all at once. So rather than having to go in with a rigger or a detailed brush like this and have to individually put in marks like this, yeah, so one at once, you can get lots and lots of marks made in one go. So again, now the other thing to remember is when you're doing any kind of foliage, you must start with the distant foliage first. So if I put the foliage there and I move this up just a touch, you can see both pictures now. We should be able to anyway. So we've got the foliage, the real foliage here, and we've got the painted foliage underneath. So what we're doing is we're going to look at this stuff that's in the distance here, and we're just going to put in some marks like this. And again, we're just looking for an impression here. So light marks, we've got some sort of scratty foliage here, and we've got some different marks where I'm just going to press a little bit more over here. So you can use a variety of methods with this fan brush. You can sort of flick like that. Let me put a bit more colour on there. So you can flick. So in the foreground where the foliage is quite long, you can press and flick. Press and flick. But you must do the stuff in the distance first, because otherwise you get this weird sort of flatness to your work. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up a bit more yellow. I'm using this yellow here, the cadmium yellow, and I'm going to mix that into that light colour so we get a different tone to use with our fan brush. And I'm just using this fan brush for people who might have done a bit of painting before, you know, and want to do a little bit more detailed work. Whereas, you know, if you're a beginner, so remember, start in the distance and just put in, and can you see how lovely that is? Start in the distance, put in some marks. And you don't want to don't get rid of all your sponging that you made underneath. We don't want that. We just want a variety of mark making. So remember, over here where the leaves are a bit larger, you can just sort of press around with your fan brush. And then when it gets a little bit more closer to you, then you can make different marks. And then when it's really close, you can really go to town and get some of those marks in there. So I'm going to do some nice long grasses. They should be longer. They're in the foreground, right? So they should be longer. Move your brush around so you have longer marks and shorter marks. A variety of mark making, remember? This is getting a little bit dry, so I'm just going to add a touch of water. And I like these long grasses, so I'm going to put some more here on there. And really, this is your time to play now. Play around with different textures and different mark making. Right, so I'm going to put my brush into water so that it doesn't dry off. I'm going to pick up that rigger brush. This is the rigger brush, and I'm going to put in some more defined marks with this brush. So I'm coming up out of here, and I'm putting some, get a bit more paint on there. So we've got some marks that go like this, where the grasses are bent. We've got some coming down into areas like this. Don't overdo it, just light suggestions of grasses coming down and into this area. You can see that the colour will stand out a little bit better if it's got a darker background behind it. So maybe we'll put a few more in this area. So really, that is all you need to do. I mean, this will take you a while. So I'm going to put this on time lapse so that I can do this a bit quicker. But basically all you're doing is you're using the rigger brush, the fan brush, any brushes you've got that are detailed, and you're just putting in all these detailed marks, and you're going to do them with light colours to begin with and then darker colours afterwards. So if I just give you a little bit of green in here, so we can go, it's always best to work from the bottom, and then you can get a flick. So work from behind the stones or wherever, and then a flick like this, using a variety of tones and marks. If you want to practice your foliage painting before you do this, and you can really go to town in this area because it's right in the foreground. We've got a variety of grasses and we've got a variety of shrubs, so different mark making. You can go in and you can put like these sort of shapes. There's no reason why not. Just press with the end of your brush and build up some leaf shapes like that, so we get the different forms coming out of the bushes, the leaves and the flowers. Again, it's up to you how much detail you put in, how much energy you want to put into this sort of detail. You know, you might get fed up, but if you do, just leave it and come back to it another time if you've run out of time or whatever. Okay, so play with your greens, make sure that you get these smaller marks in the distance, smaller, shorter mark making coming down that area there. And of course you can use colour. So if you've got flowers, I'm just going to use the pink that I've got because I haven't got any colours with me at the moment, because I'm going to do this in time lapse. But you can put in your flowers like that. Make up the colours if you want. It's quite nice to do that at times, just have a little bit of free reign. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on time lapse and I'm going to finish this area so that you don't have to watch the painful build-up of this this area here. Okay. Okay, so a few finishing touches so that you don't go off with your lines on your glass house. I recommend you just draw them in. So make sure you put a curve onto those lines, and also think about the perspective and the fact that as it comes round towards you, it will change direction. Can you see how I did that? so the lines change the curve like that. So like I said, if you're not confident with hand painting these on, then just draw them on. I mean, the pencil line is you know, pretty good there, but I'm going to use a little bit of burnt umber with a bit of blue in it, and this rigger brush, but you can use a detail brush or whatever with your to do your detail work. Or like I said, you know, use a pencil or even a pen. Any of those methods. Don't have too much paint on your brush, and start on the side that is not your natural. So right side, start on the left, so that you're not going over your wet marks, and keep them reasonably pale, not too dark, and you shouldn't go for too wrong really. But like I said, if you're not steady enough, then use a pen or a pencil to put these marks down. And don't worry if they're sort of faint in places. This is the metal part of the structure, and it would sort of catch the light at various stages, so it wouldn't necessarily be a continuous line. I've just put my hand on my tree, and by the way, the tree was painted just with a round brush and a bit of yellow, a bit of green and a bit of brown, just in case you need to know that. Oops. I'll just put a top on it. I'll just finish it off very cleanly, like that. And maybe we could put some structure along the base, because obviously there is it would be affected by the grass, so it doesn't matter if it's a bit sort of up and down necessarily. And over we go. Okay, you can see on the glass house that it does have some highlight to it, so I'm just going to take a bit of white and add a touch of blue into it, and I'm just going to put some streaks of highlights in. And again, you can do as much or as little of this as you please. It goes right round over there, comes in there like that. Do another one. I think I'll do a slightly lighter one. I'm just adding more white. There's a bit of pink down the bottom here as well. Maybe put a bit of pink into that mix. And these are just really resting on the panels that are there. So it's multiple panelled. You could do some coming down like that. Don't do all of the panels. It just makes it look a bit sort of rigid if you do that. But you know, you can put a few in here and there just to give a little bit of information. Okay, so now what else have we got to do? We've got to put the windows in on the house. So I'll use the same burnt umber blue mix, and I'm just going to put in some little suggestions of windows. Probably could do with being a bit bigger than that, but they're all right. Maybe another one there. I don't actually know how many windows there are on this building, but again, it's in the distance. You don't want too much detail. There's a dark pipe coming down off the roof. So let's put that in like that. And we'll put a dark line along the top ridge. Just to solidify it a bit more. Oh, my hand is shaky. Like that. Don't think we need much more than that. I'll just put a line down that corner just to sort of finish it. Just make it a little bit darker there. Again, you can go into more detail if you want to. It's entirely up to you. You can put more flowers in, you can put more foliage in, you can put the people in. Shall I put the people in? Let's put the people in. So with people, you just paint them very simply. Again, they're in the distance. You don't want them to be too big, you don't want them to be too small. So if you're worried, then take a pencil and just draw in your figures so you know that they're in the right place at least. And they're highlighted against that green background, so I'm going to put them like there. Oops, just dropped my pencil on the floor. They've all got white hats on, so that makes it really useful. Let's put, it must have been a lovely sunny day when they were there. Just using my rigger brush again, but it's only because I've got it on me. Got any more of that? I'm going to take a touch of burnt umber and I've put a bit of orange into it. I'm going to try and mix up a sort of semi-skin colour, but it's quite dark. They're in shadow, so I'm putting a bit of burnt umber into that. So we've got a face there, a face there, and a face there. And then we go into white tops. So again, just a suggestion of a top. Again, they're in the distance, so you don't want them to be too prominent. And then we've got a beigey sort of skirt for the lady, and we could put him in beige trousers, maybe a bit darker for the other guy. And don't forget the shadow coming off of them. Really important that you ground them in some way. She's got white pumps on, hasn't she? He's carrying a rucksack, so let's put a rucksack on his back. She's got a stick like that, and he's got a bag on his back as well, so I'll just put a little suggestion of a bag. They look a bit big actually, but never mind. Shoes, she's got little white plimp soles on. Let's put her shoes in. They've got brown shoes. Arms, let's put arms in like that. She's got an arm coming down and his arm is coming down like that, so we'll leave him where he is. Put a little bit of shadow on his back there, same on her. Okay, so you really don't need too much more than that for detail for people. Again, like I said, just put the people in if you want to. I'm just going to put a darker edge just here just to neaten this entrance into the glass house up a bit, and a bit of shadow, I think, on that inside section. And I noticed that there's a balcony on that on the top of the house. There must be a flat roof, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of blue. I'm just going to put in some little flecks like this, so it makes it look like there's a transparency to that balcony top, like that, so you can see through it. Okay, I think that is more or less it for now. So, oh, you didn't see me painting those figures, so sorry. I'll do a close-up of the figures. In fact, if I just do this, so if I go in now and I'll zoom in on those figures that I painted that you missed. I think you saw me doing the one on the right hand side, but the two on the left. And like I said, very basic structures. There's the house. There's the glass house. Nice close up of the tree, just so you can see that. And then coming down here, if I can avoid anything tumbling over, we'll just zoom in on some of the foliage so you can see that a little bit closer. So I've got all sorts of different flowers there. I've put a little bit of a hint of blue coming down that middle section where the stream is, and I just put some orange flowers on the left hand side. I might add some bits and bobs later, but I'll put a finished picture up for you to download and print off. Let me see if I can get you a little bit more info in there. Right, okay, so let's move this up a bit. Okay, so there we have, more or less have it. Nice image of the glass house and the foliage, and it might be that you want to put a little bit more detail in on the path, maybe some gritty bits, dots or whatever, maybe a few grasses up here, I mean some clouds in the sky. But I'll leave that to you. It's up to you how much detail you use. I think these figures are a bit big, because when I paint things close up, it's difficult to see a bit of scale, but they look a bit big. But that probably would be the only thing that I would change. All right, hope you enjoy it. Take your time. Have a go at mixing greens first. Take the lessons that we learned last week about perspective for this area. Have a practice doing foliage with different brushes, maybe before you start this painting. All right, don't forget to check out my other YouTube videos. They will help you with mixing greens and using brushes. I can't fit everything into these tutorials. I do my best. Hope you enjoy it. Have a good week and see you next week.